Welcome to the London Parents Forum. Today, we're looking at choosing a school online. According to the Observer, parents are suffering sleepless nights trying to choose secondary schools for their children without setting foot in buildings or meeting teachers face to face. However, we know at Bowness Macfarlane that there are a lot of really good online tools that can help you through this problem. I'm delighted to welcome Vivian Kelly from the Independent Schools Inspectorate and Melanie Sanderson from the Good Schools Guide, who will both give a really detailed account of their tools, both how they collect data about schools and then how parents can access it and make the best use of their sites. However, before we do that, I'm going to look at some of the key tools that we at Bowness Macfarlane use when we're narrowing down our school choices. I'm going to begin by talking about the long list. So at Bowness Macfarlane, we use this term to mean that these are the schools that you're thinking about but aren't definitely yet considering. On average, we find parents have somewhere between 8 and 20 schools on their long list. It can be a bit longer than that, sometimes a bit shorter, but you want to start with a blank piece of paper or a blank Excel sheet and start compiling your list of schools. And most people start geographically, thinking about schools that would be easy to get to on a daily journey. They're thinking about a day school, particularly for pre-prep and prep schools, or an easy bus journey or drive if it's a secondary school, or a cycle ride. And if they're thinking about boarding schools, you would probably be thinking about, up to an hour's journey to pick up and collect each week. So a really good starting point for finding schools geographically is really obvious. Just use Google. And if you type in independent schools near me or schools near me, you'll get a big list of schools. However, Google doesn't give you very interesting tools for filtering those choices. What you'll get is a list of schools, and then you go to their websites. So if you want to start drilling into particular types of schools, or thinking about you only want to look at primary schools, or you only want to look at pre-prep schools, or so on, you need something that enables you to filter the information. The Mayor of London a few years ago built a very good schools atlas, which I'll link to. All the sites I'm mentioning, there'll be links to download afterwards, by the way. And that's a really quite an elegant tool, but it's for London only. The absolute kind of like leader in terms of geographic searches and mapping is a site called Locrating, which really has mapped most of the available information in the UK. It built its name on catchment areas, so the big green circle here are parents who live within the normal catchment area of that particular school. Yellow means you might be in the catchment area. Outside that, you don't really stand a chance. This is for a London primary school. Catchment doesn't work the same way for independent schools. But if you're considering state as well as independent, Locrating is a very, very useful tool. They've also pulled in most of the available public data as well, so you can get quick overviews of things like the Ofsted rating and so on. But schools near where you live is only one way of thinking about it. You might be thinking about relocating to another part of the area in the city, or another part of the county where you live, or moving altogether to some completely different part of the country. Or if that's what you're doing, suddenly your choices broaden enormously, and that's quite complicated. There's some quite good tools to help you get overviews. So that, for example, on the left, we've got a tool built by the Welsh Government, which shows all the schools in Wales. On the right-hand side, there's a very interesting Locrating tool that you get if you're a subscriber, where you can look at Ofsted ratings for schools divided up by geographic region. As you can see, there's a whole load of top-rated schools in the sort of London South East area. They're all dark green, and the Isle of Wight has quite a lot of poorly rated schools. Again, the picture within the Isle of Wight will be different, but there's a huge variety of schools within any particular region. But it gives you some sense of the performance of schools. In the independent sector, there are lots and lots of sources of reviews and advice, and these can let you view the whole of the country or the whole of a region. So, for example, Tatler rate a subset of independent schools, and they do a list of top public schools in London, top public schools in the Midlands and East Anglia, for example. Independent School Parent also reviews schools, and they've just published their list of schools of the year. Schools House is looking at schools that parents are moving to outside London at the moment. Good Schools Guide reviews areas, as does Talk Education, which is a new player, and Muddy Stilettos also reviews schools from a sort of parent perspective. So then if you want more specialist advice, both Bowness Macfarlane and Good Schools Guide have consulting services which are operating perfectly normally through the pandemic. So you can book an appointment with a consultant and start the process of having someone hold your hand through the process of choosing a school. On the other hand, you may have very specific ideas about what your child wants or needs. If they have a particular ability, like they're a really good singer and you'd like to apply for a choral scholarship, or they're looking for a sports scholarship or academic awards, and you need to know where the schools are in the country that they can apply for. The Independent Schools Council lets you map schools by particular types of awards. So, for example, you can look at all the choral scholarships, all the schools that offer choral scholarships, and that could be a fantastic way to get a free education for your child if they are able to sing in a cathedral choir, for example. If you're looking for highly academically selective schools, the league tables are a good place to start. These are all published with much fanfare by the press. So the Times publishes league tables, and the Telegraph and the Evening Standard does London. There's a few things to point out when looking for independent schools in league tables, as I've just pulled out this paragraph from the ISC website. A lot of the best independent schools don't do GCSEs, so they do IGCSE, GCSEs, so they don't appear in the GCSE league tables, or their pupils don't do the full spectrum of GCSEs, so they appear to be doing worse than they actually are. So they recommend that you look at A-level results if you're trying to compare independent schools. Also, the Evening Standard listings are free, but the others require a subscription to get in and see the league tables. We're fortunate in the UK to have fantastic government information about schools, and on the government website you can get metrics about almost any aspect of a school, from its academic performance to how many of its students stay in education or enter employment, to value added. You can find all the inspection reports by Ofsted, and you can get very good graphical overviews of how schools compare. One thing to be aware of is that all statistics tend to have an agenda, and in the government's case, they really value schools that are improving. What that can mean is that a school that's right at the top of its game, like Henrietta Barnet, where it really is one of the top A-level schools in the country, doesn't see much improvement from year to year. I mean, it goes up or down a tiny bit because of one cohort versus another cohort, but that gives the impression that it's therefore not an improving school, and it's below average on improvements at A-level. But that doesn't mean in any way that it's a bad school. It just means that there isn't anywhere for it to go. So you need to be a little bit careful when interpreting some of the metrics that they use on the government's website. Statistics can tell you a certain amount, but really you want to get like a view from behind about what the school's actually like from people who are at it. So using your network is really quite important. You might well be logging into Mumsnet or nappyvalley.net, or on Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups, or just messaging friends. Here I'm asking a friend about after-school clubs, but it works really well for schools as well. Talk to people who you know whose children are going there or are there, and if you can, try and meet friends' children who are at those schools, and ask them the kind of questions that you'd like to know, and make your own judgments. Do the children seem happy? Are they getting the appropriate amount of homework? Do they seem? What happens when things go wrong? These kinds of questions you can really only ask other parents, and you just build up a sense from talking to your friends. So once you've got a long list, you then need to start thinking about a short list. And this is where you need to do a bit of a deep dive really into schools. I mean, some of the schools you'll be able to cross off quite quickly, particularly from talking to friends. But once you get, say, to a short list of, say, 6 or 8 schools, you'll need to really delve into those schools to rank them and decide which ones will be your favourites. So normally one would say at this point, this is when you should start visiting schools, going to open days, having tours, and so on, maybe attending a concert or any other public event that the school's organising. But that's probably not possible at the moment. So you'll go to the school website, and schools are all busy organising events for parents. So you'll find that you can attend things, but they'll be online, and you should do that and visit and attend their open days, watch concerts, watch their videos, and so on. These will be the marketing view, but they will tell you a lot about how the school is and how it communicates and what it values. If you want a sense of of its achievement, destinations are a very good thing to look at for prep schools, and they're also good for senior schools as well. What universities they feed, so where their children end up. And that's not just for the top end, looking at, obviously, this school, for example, sends pupils to Eton and Haileybury and very academic schools, but its children attend a broad range of schools, and that tells you something about the kind of pupils that they have in the school. The staff list can also be incredibly helpful. In this case, it's not particularly helpful because they haven't listed any qualifications, but if they do, that can tell you a lot about the kind of people that they employ. The other part of the school website that's really, really important to look at is the admissions pages. Here you can find out about the detailed process involved in joining a school at a different age group. So, for example, if you're joining at 7+, you need to know, are they doing any sort of testing at 7? And when do you need to register? Do you need to pay a deposit? Will they be interviewing? Do you need to register before you go to an open day? What is it? They will set, each school is different, and they will set out their application process. Sometimes it's really quite detailed, and it's absolutely vital that you apply at the right time at each step of the process. So you really do need to put all the schools on your shortlist. You need to know what the process is going to be. This is going to be a shameless plug now. It's very, very helpful to see schools in action and to compare them in action. Now, the thing that's difficult is that often they're doing wildly different things online. So what we've set up at School Show are events where we ask 8 to 10 schools to do something similar, and we look at, say, schools in the West Country or schools in the home counties, and their heads will be showing us around a school, meeting some pupils, and you'll get a sense in that hour of 8 or 10 schools that might be on your shortlist, and what you think of the heads, how they come across, how they talk to the pupils, how they talk to parents, the kind of things that they value, their sense of humour, their sense of style. Things that give you a sense of whether this is someone that you can deal with. I'm going to publish a complete list of tools that I mentioned today on our website, so you can download them afterwards. And meantime, I'm really delighted to be turning to 2 organisations that really have perhaps the most knowledgeable views of the sector. So the Independent Schools Inspectorate inspect 1,200 odd of the most well-known independent schools in the UK, and they have a really excellent website, which Vivian Kelly is going to introduce to us. She's communications manager for the Inspectorate and knows everything there is to know about their website. And Melanie does a similar role at the Good Schools Guide, which is also is the most independent of all the review sites, probably the only really fully independent review site. She's going to introduce how the Good Schools Guide collects its data and how their website works.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Melanie Sanderson, Managing Editor of the Good Schools Guide. And today I'm going to build a little bit on what Guy said earlier to give you an overview of how you can use the Good Schools Guide to help yourself find a school for your child during these most difficult of times. So first of all, just a little bit about the Good Schools Guide. We were founded almost 35 years ago and started our life really as a very small pamphlet that was designed to blow the lid on what really went on in a few very top public schools. And since then, over the years, we've expanded and grown to covering now 1,300 schools around the UK. We're about 1,000 independent schools and about 300 state schools and counting. State schools are a real focus for us at the moment. And we also have reviews of tutor agencies and international schools in a number of markets around the world. And you can read our reviews either in our books or online. So reviews are behind the paywall on our website, and that also gives you access to a library of informative articles written, broadly speaking, by our own writers. And a lot of people ask us who our writers are, and they come from many different walks of life. So we have many people with teaching qualifications, former teachers, special educational needs teachers, but we also have lawyers, we have marketing people, we have journalists, but what we all have in common is we are all parents. So we are all either on the journey through our child's education, or we have been there and done it. So we're really well placed to advise you on what you're looking for your child. Similarly, all our consultants who work for the consultancy part of the business, helping parents find schools for their child, are writers for the guide. So not only are they experts in guiding you in the right direction, but they have walked the halls of the schools that they're recommending. They have eaten the school lunches, met the headmaster, know the admissions people extremely well, etc. So we're ideally placed to help you find the right school for your child. Just a little bit about how our reviews are put together. I sort of touched on it already, but what typically happens is our writers spend at least a day in a school. We have unfettered access to whatever we want to see within schools generally. Schools are, really cooperative and more than happy to open their doors to us. So we interview members of the senior leadership team, spend huge amounts of time with head teachers. We carry out unsupervised meetings with pupils, which is a really great way to sort of get to the real nitty gritty of, so what's the school lunch really like? What's the best day of the week to have lunch here? And what days should we avoid? How much homework do you really get? And how much pressure are you under? So those really in-depth questions that give you a genuine view of what it's like to be at a school. We'll ask them things like, are there any gay kids in your class? How are they treated? Or, how has the recent Black Lives Matter situation been dealt with in your school? So we're getting really into the nitty gritty of it. The other thing that we do, which is quite unique, is we use our network to find parents who have got children in the school to tell us about their experiences. And we try very hard not to use the parents whose schools like to cherry pick. So we are not talking to the chairperson of the PTA or the mother of the captain of the rugby team. We're talking to real parents of average Joe kids. And that's how we get a lot of our intelligence that goes into our reviews and gives us a really rounded view of what the school's really like. And then, as Guy said, local intelligence, you cannot beat talking to people who know, talking to local, we've been known to hang around outside school gates, sit in local cafes, but all our writers tend to live in the areas about which they write. So they will more often than not have friends with children in the school that they're going to write about, or if they don't, they will know somebody who does, and they'll be picking their brains all the time. So we're working very hard to get a very detailed, rounded picture of life within a school and really deliver to parents everything the prospectus doesn't tell you. So coupled with resources such as the ISI, or in the state sector, Ofsted, and some of the other things that Guy mentioned, we can help be part of giving a very clear, focused and rounded picture of a school. So I think Guy covered most of this, but I really wanted to reiterate the point that he made about looking for independent resources when you're researching schools for your children. So there is definitely a place for a beautiful, glossy, open morning on the school's website and all the amazing images that they like to show as part of their marketing. And, you know, there's also a place for resources such as Muddy Stilettos and Tatler, which are, you know, not that the schools pay to be included in them. And it's great to read those to get part of the picture. But when you are really getting into the thick of fact finding, independence is key. So ISI and Ofsted, clearly totally independent. Chat rooms, such as Mumsnet, you know, you can get some very good insights on those. Although always worth remembering that people tend to only post on those sites when they've got something major to moan about. So sometimes to be taken with a pinch of salt. Now, I've already said the Good Schools Guide is a totally independent resource. Again, Guy's touched on league tables. Definitely a really important part of the picture, but as he mentioned, they can be misleading because not everybody is comparing, is using the same data. So just be aware of those. And also they don't really tell you whether a school will suit your child. It's important to sort of remember that the schools at the top of the league tables are, without exception, the most selective schools in the country. So they are taking the brightest of the bright to start with, and of course they're going to get best results at the end. It doesn't necessarily mean that their teaching is better than the more inclusive school down the road that has easier entrance exams. So definitely worth looking at them, but don't think they are the be-all and end-all. And finally, one thing that I always like to say to parents is, you know, to compile a list of questions when you're contacting schools and looking into research around schools, but always make sure that it relates to your child's interests and aptitudes and not to yours. So I'm a real sucker for an art room, beautiful art department. That was my thing at school. My children can't even draw stickmen, so I have to sort of close my eyes off to that and not be too influenced by it. And it's the same with dads and often with sports facilities. Just try to focus on what is right for your child and not necessarily what would have been right for you in your youth. So we're going to take a quick look through how you might look for, how you might use the Good Schools Guide to search for a school for your child. If you've been on our website before, you'll be familiar with this. This is our homepage. We're going to do two different kinds of search so that you can see different ways that we can use the site. But you'll always start with clicking on the school search option there. And then you can look through a number of different types of filter. So you can look at the school name if you know what you're going to, exactly what you're looking for, local authorities, age range, what kind of school, everything from whether it's co-ed or boys, girls only. And there's lots and lots of different choices to filter down your options there. But what we're going to look for first of all is for, we're going to look at a scenario looking for an independent girls' school within easy reach of Watford. That's going to be our first scenario, a secondary school. So first of all, we want to live in Watford, so we're going to type that into the area search bar. And we don't want our daughter to be travelling too far to school on the bus, so we're going to say we want a school within 10 miles of Watford, so that it's nice and close for her. The next thing we're going to say is we're going to choose a secondary school. So up here, we have chosen our age range, which is 11 to 19. And of course, with a junior school, you would be at the other end. And we want an independent school for girls only. And it's going to be a Good Schools Guide school, which means we've visited and reviewed it, because obviously if you're on our website, you will want to read what we've got to say about it. And it's going to be a school in the mainstream rather than a school for children with special needs. So from that, we get 8 results. And when we've got our list of results, we can either show them on a map, or we can see them as a list. And on this occasion, we are going to focus in on the North London Collegiate School, one of our top girls' independent day schools in London. Fabulous school. So once we've clicked through to the school review, this is what you can see. Now, the summary page can be accessed by anybody who chooses to visit our website. And as you can see, they can find out the address, the telephone number, the name of the head, whether there's any boarding, how many pupils there are, and what the fees are, etc. Interestingly, we can also click through to the ISI report from there. And in the case of state schools, there would be an Ofsted report as well. So that is available to everybody. That is in front of our paywall. The reviews are all behind a paywall. And by clicking on this little square here, it will take us through. Our reviews are typically about, for a secondary school, about 3,000 words long. We aim that they are really enjoyable to read, and they cover in depth all aspects of school life. So we go into details about the head teacher. So I'm just going to go back actually, if I can. Go back. They go into details about the head teacher. We look at academics, what the top subjects are, the teaching styles, sports and extracurricular, you know, right down to, yes, they win everything, but is that because parents have all their kids coached outside of school, or because the coaching inside is great? Do they have an A to F team, or is it just the elite who are playing every week? Does the D team get good coaching? Do the activities all run regularly, and are they diverse in their approach to that kind of thing? We cover special educational needs and what the provision is. We cover pastoral care and well-being, and in that, under that heading, we look at things like bullying, inclusivity, how students of different races, etc., are treated, and then we will give a summary at the end. So it's a really, really comprehensive overview of what it's like to be in the school. It's about school lunches, you know, everything is covered there. And if you wanted to click on the destinations tab there, this actually tells you where, in the case of North London, where students come from. So you might be working backwards and thinking, okay, I want my daughter to end up at an LCS. Where should I send her to prep school? Now, this is a little bit mixed. We do rely on schools to give us this information. So some schools have more information there than others. But that's the general overview of how you would search for a secondary school. And our second search is going to be for a boys prep school. We're going to do a slightly different approach by looking at the local authority. So first of all, we're going to clear the girls' school search. And then we're going to search under local authority. And we're going to be moving, in our imaginary scenario this time, to Buckinghamshire. So we would click the Buckinghamshire box. We know we want a boys prep school. So again, we've chosen the age range here. We want an independent, boys only, good schools guide school in the mainstream. And that gives us 3 results. So we are going today to look at Daveney School, which is a fantastic boys school in Beaconsfield. So again, you've got your summary here available to everybody in front of the paywall. You've got your Good Schools Guide review. This tab here under SEN will tell us a little bit about what kinds of support they can give to what kinds of children. And we rely on school to give us that information. And here will tell us what schools boys typically move on to, which, as Guy said earlier, is incredibly useful. So our prep school reviews are slightly different in style to the secondary school review. Again, we look at in detail at the head, but we also look at how to get in, whether it's selective or not, where boys and girls move on to. And the main body of the review tends to be more of a narrative approach. we like to take our readers through almost a day in the life of what it's like to be a child in that school. So they get a real feel for the ethos and the culture that's so important when they come to choose a prep school. And this is the key. So leave as destinations. We can see very clearly here what kinds of schools the boys go on to. So if you had your heart set on a place at Shiplake, for example, at 13 plus, you can see that Daveney's would be a great place to send your boy, because they're sending a good number of boys there every year. You can see how many scholarships they got last year, and the whole range of schools that boys go off to. So really, that encapsulates how you would use the Good Schools Guide site to help find your child a school.
Thank you, Melanie. That's incredibly helpful. Oh, I'll let your final screen. Do you want to stop sharing then when? Brilliant. I won't ask any questions at the moment, because I've got all sorts of things I want to ask you. But Vivian's now going to introduce the Independent Schools Inspectorate.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for having me, Guy. I will take you as best I can through school inspection. I think you're probably all fairly clear now that what we are is the independent school version of Ofsted. The only thing to say on that is that school inspection is very, very complex. I've done my best to simplify it here. So if some of this you may think it may not quite make sense, or if it just seemed a little bit too simple, that'll be why. I'm also a parent. I've got two children, 9 and 13, who are currently lucky enough to be at independent school. So I've had some experience with this myself. In terms of school inspection in the independent sector, we don't inspect all independent schools. We've got, I told you this was complex. We inspect just over half, about 1,400 as it says up there. Ofsted do the remainder. The main thing to say on that is that the schools we inspect, about 80 to 85% of pupils in the independent school sector are at schools that we inspect. So the schools we inspect tend to be bigger. They tend to be the ones you've probably almost all heard of. And the Ofsted schools that are inspected in the independent school sector are generally the much smaller schools. So that's mainly the difference. So if you come to isi.net and you can't find a school you're looking for, go to Ofsted, and vice versa. If you can't find an independent school in Ofsted, come and have a look at our site. We just do England. Wales has a different body. Scotland has a different body. We do quite a lot of international schools, but that's a separate scheme. It's called British School Overseas. I won't go into that now. Just to give you a very kind of, again, simplified overview of how we work. The Secretary of State gives us our licence, and we work directly into the DfE. There are 3 sets of regulations against which we inspect. These are the independent school standards, which are they're set by the DfE. Another one called the National Minimum Standards for Boarding. Don't get thrown by the minimum. They're good standards. They're high. The standards of care for boarding are very, very good, but for some reason they've got minimum in there. And then the final one is the early years foundation stage, which that does go across us and Ofsted. The other two do not. Us in the state sector. The other two do not. So what we do is we go into schools, and our job is to spend time in schools and work out whether these schools are meeting those standards or not, meeting the regulations. We do not set the regulations. We work out whether schools are meeting them. And the DfE is the body that tells us when to inspect schools. So it's and which schools we're inspecting. So it's, again, that's not up to us. It's not up to us when we come in to see a particular school. We are funded by the schools that we inspect on a subscription model. If they do not want to be if they do not want an ISI inspection, they can leave the associations, which is a kind of body in the middle, and go and have Ofsted inspections. So there's no obligation for them to be inspected by ISI at all. Now, this is the bit that we do get to decide on. So we have a framework for inspection. As I said, the DfE set the standards. So for example, here, what I've put is one of the standards, so we can just look at it. Part 2.2b specifies a very straightforward standard: pupils acquire speaking, listening, literacy and numeracy skills. So then the work we do is working out what we would look at in a school to assess that. So there's obviously quite a few things you could look at there, depending on which standard, which part you're looking at. These what you want to then look at in the school can either be quite straightforward or it can be a little bit more complex. But here, for example, we'd look at the teachers, obviously. working out what they understand by these things, what kind of curriculum they put together to help pupils learn to speak, listen and do their maths. The sequencing of the curriculum, which is a big thing in Ofsted at the moment. They've been doing a lot of work on curriculum sequencing. How the school assesses whether its own teaching is effective or not, and whether the pupils are able to demonstrate, both in terms of the workbooks, which we'd spend time looking at, and also face-to-face. So this framework takes a lot of work. We renew it every 6 years to take account of changes in education, and also to take account of improvements in inspection practice, because obviously we're, like most bodies, we're constantly reflecting, constantly thinking, oh, actually this could be done better, that could be done better. So our inspections, there's basically two kinds. There are some other kinds of inspections which you may well see reports for on our site, but I'm just going to take you through the two main ones. The first thing to talk about, I just wanted to let you know about safeguarding. So that runs through every single inspection we do as a constant. It's quite a tricky thing to inspect, safeguarding. We've got a lot of experience in it, but it is hard. There's both the policies, there's the paperwork, and then there's the practice. The paperwork has to be right, and most schools do get it right. But then what is quite difficult to assess is putting that paperwork into practice. So watching the school, understanding the culture of the school, seeing what their response is when you challenge them on something, checking that all their safeguarding concerns have always been followed up in exactly the right way. Understanding how they would approach things, what kind of self-improvement systems they have. We cannot act directly on safeguarding concerns, but obviously we're part of the big picture, and we've learned from so many, as everyone has, we've learned from so many horrendous cases in the past that it's so important that all these organisations work together. And we do our very best to share information with everybody, primarily the DFE, but then with other bodies as well, all the local authorities of the independent schools. So we have a dedicated phone line and email address for concerns. Everything is logged. Anything serious that indicates non-compliances go straight to the DFE for them to deal with. And anything that isn't that serious but has been logged will always be passed to an inspector to look at when they do go in to inspect that school. So that's safeguarding. Now, the two inspection types. We've got two basic ones which run, each school gets one of these over the 6-year cycle. A regulatory compliance is basically the policies of the school. So we go into a school, we spend a lot of time looking at almost every single policy, checking they're all completely right, checking they've all got the evidence behind them. For example, if it's, all the health and safety, we have to check all that the contractors have been in, and all the paperwork that they left behind absolutely is present, and it's there, and it's dated, and it's in the right place. It's all that sort of thing. All the DBS checks on the teachers and all the other support staff and sports staff and et cetera, are all present and in place and have been done at the right time. And you get the picture. We do have to also look at whether these policies are put into practice. Again, which I said is more difficult, but it's not impossible. So, and what we judge on a regulatory compliance inspection at the end is either that the regulations, the standards have been met or not met. So those are the judgments you get out of what we call an RCI, a regulatory compliance inspection. The second inspection is the inspection that you really would be looking at as a parent, I would say. Regulatory compliance has its place, without question. But this one, the educational quality inspection with focused compliance, is probably of more use to you. So that, as it says, is looking at the education that the children are getting in the school. The focused compliance means that we just do a much smaller bit of the regulatory compliance. So we don't look at all policies, we get a much smaller section of the policies, check those, again, check the evidence behind them, the paperwork behind them, and that's that section. The educational quality section has two fundamental bits to it. We're focusing broadly on what we call outcomes for pupils, and those two bits are achievement, which isn't just academic achievement, it's also sporting achievement, musical achievement, and then personal development, which is, as it might sound, completely unrelated to how well a child is doing academically, but to do, it's kind of like the progress scores in the state sector. It's to do with that child, how they've changed, how they've come on, how the school has supported them in what they've been doing, how they developed as an individual. So behaviour, confidence, those kinds of things. The judgments we have in our EQIs are excellent, good, sound, and unsatisfactory, and we're usually in the school for 3 days for one of those. Just to say, there's an art to school inspection and a science part. The science part is more the kind of paperwork side. The art is the experience of the inspectors, having some intuition, understanding the school. And we have a concept of what we call materiality, which is, for example, if we go into a school, if an inspector goes into a school and everything is going absolutely brilliantly, but, for example, a piece of paper from the contractor who came to check that there's no asbestos in the school has a wrong address on it, we will go, okay, we're not going to say this is not your compliance section is not met, because everything else is absolutely fantastic. We can see that it's a tiny bit of information that is missing. We would not say, okay, this school is going to be, I wouldn't say failed, but it's going to be judged as not met in this particular situation. Were it many policies, or were it lots of things that are missing, then that would become much more serious, and the inspector would probably make a decision of not met. But there's I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's absolutely not black and white, because it cannot be, because obviously we've got this assessment of culture, which is necessarily slightly subjective, and we've got this balance with the very objective side of the school inspections. But fundamentally, in terms of looking at reports on our site, you want to really be looking for an educational quality inspection. The last thing I'll say on that is, obviously inspections have been suspended since March. We've got a bit of a backlog. Every school gets both of these over a 6-year period. So if you're looking at a school and there isn't a recent EQI, that'll be why. They're due one. If we go back in January, which may happen, we're going to, obviously all the schools that are due EQIs will be having them. So it may be worth checking back. But I'm afraid if there isn't one currently, or there is one but it's very out of date, I'm afraid there's not much we can do about that at present. I'm sorry to say. I'll just tell you a bit about our inspectors. They're a fantastic bunch. We have two kinds. We have about 150 what we call reporting inspectors. These are a mix of, they're the most experienced of our inspectors. They're a mix of serving and retired teachers. It's a full-time role, basically. And they often have a particular area of expertise, like SEND or EdTech or something else, modern languages. And they are the lead inspector on every inspection. They are supported by a varying number of team inspectors who are current teachers in independent schools and senior leaders. We use bursars as well because they're very good on the compliance side. So because they're in schools, they're very familiar with educational trends, and they're also familiar with challenges of a school. So particularly at the moment, obviously, when we do go back, we're going to have to be very sensitive to what schools have been through, the kinds of places they are currently, which is very different to the kind of places they were in February. So the team inspectors really help with that. The nature and the size of the school dictates the makeup. We build our teams by hand. We don't have an app we don't have AI that does this yet. It's a very complex process because we want to get the people and their specialisms and their backgrounds right. There's a very long list of things that inspectors need to tick to be able to go and inspect a particular school. They've obviously got to have no connection with it, etc., but they also need to have the right areas of specialisms to be able to look at that kind of school. So it's team building is a large part of our work, and getting those teams right. Because our team inspectors and our reporting inspectors previously were all part of the sector, obviously our inspections are based on a kind of peer review model. And we think it works very, very well. Very well. It means that as well as doing the inspection, there's an opportunity to share best practice, which I think for some schools, particularly not so much in London, but for some of the schools that are geographically perhaps a bit more isolated, let's say up in the Northwest, they can find this really, really beneficial. So they, half of them thinks, oh gosh, a school inspection, but the other half thinks, oh, fantastic, a school inspection, because they get to talk to somebody else has been doing or is currently doing exactly the same job as them and understands it inside out and has an awful lot of interesting things to say about it that they maybe haven't thought of, because we all live in our own worlds. And we train our inspectors regularly to update them on guidance, which changes thick and fast at the moment, or our ISI process, which also changes from time to time. This is a simplified version of the inspection process, but just to let you know what we do. As both Guy and Melanie have said, we are a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. You could never just rely on an ISI report, but I do think it's a piece that absolutely has to be there when you're looking at everything you want to look at to understand the schools. So before inspection, they get a short period of notification. We ask them to upload their policies so we can start doing that online. We look at their safeguarding records, we look at their website, we talk to the head, and then we ask them to issue a survey. I'll come on to surveys in a minute so you can have a quick look at those, and we plan the inspection. During inspection, we also check a section of policies while we're in school and talk to the staff about the policies to see what they understand by them. We talk to the head, the senior leadership team, the governors. Governance is a whole other area which is quite interesting. Some of you may want to look at that when you're looking at schools as well. The teachers, the support staff, pupils, we look at the books, we classes, we go to, you know, after school football practice or lunchtime choir, assemblies, etc. We have something, all our inspectors have something called a record of evidence, which is a very big file that they build up of all the things that they've looked at to support their judgment. And that absolutely has to be complete, because quite often, if any judgments are called into question, which obviously they can be and they should be sometimes, we need to be able to provide that record of evidence and explain very clearly why we came to the judgment we came to. And then at the end of the inspection, the inspector gives the verdict verbally to the head so that they know what has been found over the course of the inspection period. After the inspection, we write it up and we make sure that our inspection report is supported by that record of evidence. There's various internal processes for quality assurance. We do copy editing, proofreading, etc., etc. We have an internal performance management database, which schools complete as well as us, so we get a good feel for how our inspectors are performing. The report goes to the school for what we call a factual accuracy check, and then it goes to the DFE, and then it's published on our website, and it's also published on the school's website. It's mandatory for them to publish their school reports, their inspection reports. So if it isn't up there, it should be. It might make you wonder why it isn't. So the surveys, I referenced these. What we do, you may well have experience of these, or if you haven't, you may one day. You may well get one, and what happens is you have a very short window to complete it, and I will explain briefly why that is, because I understand it does cause parents, including me, quite a lot of annoyance. What happens is we notify the school on the Monday morning that we're coming, and we're arriving on the Tuesday. By the end of Tuesday, we need the survey results back in, because if there's anything that the survey has thrown up, the reporting inspector needs time to look at that particular issue. Let's say it's something very serious like bullying, like a lot of children have written, they don't think the school deals well with bullying. The reporting inspector needs to get under the skin of that. They need to understand this, they need to look at it. So these tend to get sent out to parents, I think, on about a Monday, and they're given about, I don't know, 6 hours or something to complete them. They're very short and they're quite easy to complete, but that's why I'm afraid you get such a small window. So they're clearly quantitative. The way they are completed is one goes to all pupils, one goes to all staff, and one goes to all parents. You can see there's 5 options along the top, various statements with which to disagree or agree. We have basic thresholds internally for throwing up areas that the reporting inspector needs to look into. So for example, if it's, you know, I don't think the food in the canteen is particularly healthy, the threshold might be something like 25% because it's not particularly serious. So if we have 25% strongly disagrees, it'll be thrown up for the reporting inspector to look into. If it's, for example, bullying, the threshold is very, very low because we need to look into that one, obviously because it's a much more grave area of concern. These are not perfect, these surveys. We are doing our best with them, but if you get one as a parent, you might think, didn't quite get everything. We appreciate that. We are in the process of revisiting them. At the moment, they work well, but we do think internally they could work a bit better. Right, this is our website. This is isi.net. So you come here. Like Melanie, we're also redoing our website, but it's taking us a little while at the moment. You would go to find a report, which is up there, very small and very grey. It's one of the things we will change. So you click on that and you go through to this page, which basically just lists school in alphabetical order. And you can put your school name in here, or you can search by location if that's easier for you. And then you would go through onto the school page. Sorry, I should just say the reason we've chosen the 2 schools we chose is not because we have any particular relationship with them. All of us have looked at North London Collegiate and Davenese because both of them were visited recently by both ISI and by the Good Schools Guide. So Davenese, you can see here, it's got an EQI, and that's an educational quality, and an FCI that goes with it, the focused compliance report from 2019, which is fantastic, nice recent one. It had a compliance inspection in 2016, and prior to that it had a standard in 2010. That's on a previous framework, which is why it's not an inspection name that we'll recognise. So then you can click on that and download it as a PDF. There you go, you just click on the red box. Now I'll just tell you things to look at. I have got a couple of report pages which I can show you, but basically on an EQI you will get a page which will tell you your background information, so the school's status, by which I mean whether it's charitable, whether it's privately owned, whether it's in a trust, and probably some information about the governance structure. Like I said, it's quite an interesting area, governance structure. Good governance is something which people I think maybe we could do more work on in terms of trying to raise awareness of the correlation between good governance and good inspection outcomes. Understanding school governance and how it can be done very well is a job that a particular association has been doing a lot of work on, but I do think it's something that definitely ISI could do something on as well. The school structure, which will similar in terms of age range and how it's positioned across sites. It's aims and ethos, which I've got 2 boxes down below, which we'll have a look at just to compare, and then pupil information. You'll see, and pupil information, it will give you, for example, the range of distance that generally pupils travel from to get to the school, the kind of backgrounds in terms of their families. And it also will give you a BAME quota generally for that school. It's an area that we discuss a lot internally, and we keep going around the houses saying, is this useful, is this right? We're still not quite sure. It is there, and it's there for some people who do find it really useful. So for example, my daughter's at a school which has about a third to a half Jewish children, and a lot of those parents liked the fact that they knew the school had a lot of, it's not a Jewish school, but they had a lot of Jewish children there because they knew that things like taking religious holidays or the food in the canteen, these things would have been taken into account already. Like I say, it's an area that we're discussing, but it will tell you the information, some information there about the kinds of backgrounds that the pupils are from. So on an EQI, as I said, we have this achievement and personal development. In terms of what they will be looking at once you've drilled that down, it's how well the education caters, the atmosphere. Again, this is done on inspection over quite a short period. So it will, the information we have on atmosphere, coupled with the information that Melanie will have on atmosphere, for example, would be help to give you a much clearer picture. How exam results compare with national benchmarks and how well the pupils are cared for. So what I've taken out here is, which I think it's very easy, when you start reading these sections, it's very easy to kind of just glaze over and think, oh, it all sounds wonderful, particularly when you read our reports, everything just sounds marvellous. And it does. But if you can stop and just try and compare them or take a step back and actually look at what's written, it can really help to start to understand the school. So the ethos, or the aim of the school of North London Collegiate, it says, provide an ambitious education with a nurturing environment, empowers all pupils with the confidence to embrace new challenges and determination to recognise and achieve excellence. It's a fantastic school, it sounds fantastic. But Davenese is quite different. A vision to engage, inspire and challenge. Sorry, I can't quite see that bit. Something academic excellence, modern teaching, traditional values, vibrant, caring, inclusive atmosphere. The objective is to develop young men who are curious, motivated and ambitious, courteous, confident, thoughtful and independent in character. So when you put those 2 things together, I think you can get a very strong feel. These schools are, I mean, obviously they're different because they've got very different pupils in terms of, a whole list of reasons, but they're very different even if they were the same school for, if they're both secondary girls' schools. They've got courteous, they've got thoughtful in the Davenese. They haven't got that in North London. I'm sure they do want their girls to be thoughtful and courteous, but they haven't put it there. So I think if you can kind of try and imagine the kind of children that these schools are aiming at in terms of the people who are leaving, whether it's at 18 or 13, I think if you look at aims and ethos, it can give you quite a lot more information than it might seem. That is just an example sheet of what I meant by the background information. So it'll give you a bit about the school. And then this is the section about the pupils. So, it says a range of professional and ethnic backgrounds, etc. there. And then this is the Davenese EQI section. So this will take you through, when you read this, what the inspector has observed in terms of the teaching. They've stood or sat in the classroom for quite a long time. They've talked to the teachers and the pupils, and they will have watched exactly how things are progressing in the classroom, the kind of activities the teacher puts out for the children, what clearly you've got a good feel for what the teacher's aiming at. Here will be the section where we have our excellent, good, sound or unsatisfactory judgments in place. Davenese comes out as excellent. But this is the section, as I said, it's very easy to read it and think, oh, it sounds lovely. But if you can just read it as carefully as you can, it will definitely give you a strong picture of exactly what's happening in terms of, from a formal point of view in that school. I think that's me finished.
Great, thank you very much. That's incredibly helpful, Vivian. So we're over time already, but I'm going to go on for a few minutes just because we had that break in the middle, and I think it would be good just to ask a few questions. So I've written down like just a few really basic ones for you both. What we're really discovering, I think, is that there are an enormous range of metrics with which you could use to compare schools, and that's really quite difficult, I think, for parents who are making judgments. So what the question I've got really is like, how do you actually compare schools? Like what are the key things to be looking at? And I suppose digging into that is that inside the independent school sector is incredibly varied, from some of the most brilliant, famous schools in the country that are absolute leaders to really very small, quite culturally specific schools that would be wrong for a lot of parents and a lot of families. So how do you tell the difference, and how do you spot one type of school from another type? What should you be looking for? I don't know who wants to go first.
I'm happy to go first. I would say, first of all, to just do a basic check that, either the Ofsted or the ISI report gives it a clean bill of health. Then I would move on and look at all the things that Melanie suggested. And I think the last thing I would do at school is try and get as much local information as you can. And I mean, a friend of mine, it sounds a bit strange, but a friend of mine used to go, and exactly as Melanie said, used to hang around outside the school when the kids were leaving, just to watch and see, how they. But I think, once you've done all that, I think then going back to what Melanie said and thinking about your child is absolutely critical. The independent sector on the whole, the academic results are great. So unless you've got a really, really gifted child and you really want to push them academically, probably I wouldn't personally get into a huge pickle about the differences in terms of academic results. I think more so it's a question of where do you think your child will be happy? Where do you think will nurture your child and make them into a kind, happy, successful adult by the time they've left?
You can unmute, Melanie.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything that Vivian said, and not really a great deal to add to that, other than I think there is also another good thing to take into consideration is proximity, because I think you want to look at your child's life in a holistic way, as well as just, and their education is a really, really large and really important part of their life, but it's not everything. And I think sometimes you possibly don't want to add a really long commute on to either end of the day, and put your child in a situation where they may struggle with social life at the weekend. So I think if at all possible, factor that into your search as well. But other than that, I totally agree with everything that Vivian says.
A couple of questions for GSG. So everyone, Melanie, Jane Self's asking, how often are Good Schools Guide entries updated? And then she's asking about the paywall. Is it all or nothing?
To answer the first part of the question, we update things like exam results every year for secondary schools. So GCSE and A-level results are updated every year, along with any major changes. So if you get a new head or build a super new music block, that would be updated as a matter of course every year as part of a process that we call the Great Annual Edit. As a matter of course, schools are visited every 4 to 5 years, and we'll get a completely new write-up at that point, unless they get a new head teacher, in which case we give the new head a year to settle in, and then we'll go and visit. So sometimes that means that the window may be less than 4 or 5 years, or sometimes if a new head arrives after 5 years, then it would be slightly longer. And in terms of the paywall, what can you get in front of the paywall? Some articles, so the articles that are on our homepage, and the basic information about the schools, but behind the paywall is access to all our reviews and additional articles and data.
Thanks. I've got a question for Vivian, which is what sort of came in advance. Your metrics, excellent, good, unsatisfactory, and so on. I mean, Ofsted really front end that you get an overall judgment. Is it correct that the RSI doesn't do that? Is that right?
Well, we do use those judgments on an EQI. We currently, we don't have quite the same ones as Ofsted, although obviously we both have 4. There's a lot of debates that rage around school inspection, and I won't go through them all now, but one is obviously, the school inspection improve schools, or does it actually hinder growth and progress, which is one of the debates we have regularly. Another one is, are judgments of any use to people? Are they helpful? If a school, for example, as I said, if there's an art and a science, if you go in the music department, it's absolutely fantastic, but the art department is a bit weak, and you know, this is great and that's brilliant, but that's a bit rubbish, etc., etc. And you put it all together, can you really come out with one word? Yes, maybe Ofsted do, and I know that helped. However many, you've got over 200, let's say, members of staff, you've got 500 pupils all working really, really hard to make this community, this school community, a vibrant and exciting and a place of excellence. And if we come in and go, oh yeah, it was unsatisfactory, you kind of think, well, are we actually helping this situation? Are we actually, you know, is this adding anything? So we do currently use them. We're not 100% certain that they are the right thing to be doing, but we do understand that they have a role, and again, it's something that we discuss a lot.
But they're not sort of upfront, are they? Like when you browse a school, like the Ofsted ones are very, very visible.
That's right. They do their one judgment on the school. So we do it on, we only use them on the EQI, we use them on educational quality, and we use them on the achievement and on the personal development. So they're in the report, but we don't do a one final overarching judgment for the whole school, precisely because of the kind of the reasons of complexity, I think, really.
And just following up on that, if a school is unsatisfactory, I mean, first of all, you know, how many are, and what happens? Because in the state system, you go into special measures, don't you? So
yes. So what happens is every school that's either fails its compliance or is seen as is judged unsatisfactory from an EQI perspective gets fast tracked through to the DFE, and then will be re-inspected again. We do what's called a progress monitoring visit when we go back in to do a different kind of inspection, because it's looking specifically at the areas on which the school was weak. But we also, as part of it, like I said previously, safeguarding runs through every inspection type. So we wouldn't just, if, for example, they had they'd done some health and safety, they had a health and safety problem, we wouldn't just go in and look at the health and safety, and if we thought anything in the safeguarding area was of concern, ignore it. Clearly, we would have to look at that too. So safeguarding runs through everything, but then what we do is we do a progress monitoring visit, and then the school either will pass or fail that, will be met or unmet, and etc., etc. And if a school keeps getting unmet, the DFE will have to act on it, but that's left to the DFE. It's us to make the judgment.
Thank you very much. On that note, I'm going to say thank you very much, both of you, for a really, really informative session. I think we all know a lot more now about how to interpret RSI reports and how to use GSG, and I think hopefully parents have got a real sense of how to evaluate schools. Our next online event, as I mentioned earlier, is on the 10th of November, when we're looking at schools in the west of England. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.